And we're live. This has been a long time coming. So, hi everybody. If you haven't seen me in a while, it's because I've been off doing other stuff. But I'm so happy to be back with you all. So, welcome to the Sales Hacker Masterclass on forecasting. If you don't know me, I'm Colin Campbell. I lead the Sales Hacker team, and I used to host a lot of these and get to talk to a lot of awesome folks. It's been a while, so I've been hankering to get back. So, if you have been with us before, then you know the deal. We respect your time. We know that you could watch the recording, and you're here because you actually want to interact with us and hang out with the other folks in the room. And we promise to get to your questions, and we're going to have some fun together. So far, people are still trickling in. There's like 30, 40 of us. Please go ahead and open the chat. We're going to use that to talk to you. You can submit your questions there, and I'll make sure they get answered. Open the chat, and where it says to, change the to everyone, because then you can all talk to each other. Share your LinkedIn profiles, connect with one another, say hi, make some friends. And to get us started, why don't you share your least favorite thing about sales forecasting? And it might just be the whole thing. If you're a freak and you don't have a least favorite thing about sales forecasting, share your favorite sandwich. We'll take that too.
And we do like freaks here, so it's okay. Don't feel bad.
Can I do the sandwich one instead of the forecasting one, Colin?
Freaks welcome, sure. Hey, Kevin, nice to see you. Let us know where you're from, what your role is. It'll help us cater the conversation to you. So you know what you signed up for. We're talking about forecasting today. And there's this funny thing where we all kind of forecast more or less the same way. And a lot of us take pride in the way we do it. There's definitely an art to it. And I have to say, it does take a lot of skill to get it right, because we're all doing it, turns out, the hard way. And so we have 3 people here today who can help us paint a picture of why that is and what the new way looks like. And we're going to try to get pretty specific for you. We might even be able to answer some of your questions of like helping you fix your forecasting process. So to help us do that, we've got Sam McKenna. She's the founder at Sam Sales Consulting. You probably know her from LinkedIn. She's all over it. If you don't follow her yet, follow Sam McKenna on LinkedIn. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Colin.
We've got Todd Abbott. He's the CEO of InsightSquared. Thanks for being here, Todd. Really appreciate it.
Good to be here.
And Mary Shea, former principal analyst at Forrester, now VP of Evangelism. I'm going to get it wrong, Mary.
I know. I didn't intend to make it difficult. So I'm the, you could just say I'm the chief evangelist. We'll just throw a C in front of my title and give me a promotion today.
Cool. Yeah, chief evangelist at Outreach. So a lot of cool different perspectives here, like Todd's in-house, right, running a fast-growing startup that happens to serve this need of like having disparate data sources and can help with forecasting. Mary has seen inside of almost every go-to-market, SaaS solution and has all this perspective. And then Sam, on the practitioner side, right, you spend a lot of time with sales leaders trying to fix broken processes and things like this. So we're going to get into it deep. Thanks for keeping the chat active, everybody. We're going to jump in. So here to start us off, here's a scary fact. 60% of all forecasted deals do not close. They're forecasted to close and they don't. So we're worse than a coin flip on the deals that we forecast to close. So this is a loaded question intentionally, Todd, but why does forecasting suck right now?
It sucks because it's a very manual inspection and interrogation-oriented process that sales managers and CROs have been deploying for decades. As an ex-CRO myself, I kind of view it as the least stimulating, intellectually stimulating part of the job. You've got reps that are, some cases don't know where a deal is, or hoping a deal is going to come in, or hiding a deal. And then you've got this whole process of managers trying to interrogate and inspect to figure out what's real and what's not, because forecasting is such a critical component of job security. But it's basically all a judgment game. And we haven't really interjected into the process data and data analytics to get judgment out of it. But that's the fundamental problem, is it's very much relying on what reps put into CRM, what they say, and managers trying to figure out what's real and what's not to be able to forecast the business. It's just a very manual intensive process.
I can tell from the comments that people here agree with you. We're seeing people say like they hate how much of their week they spend on it. It's inaccurate. It's tedious. It's a non-selling activity. And Mary, you said you did some research that it turns out that there's a lot of time spent, like just man hours, people hours on forecasting every week. What does that look like again? Can you remind me?
Yeah, and I want to just make sure I answer the question too, which is, why does it suck? Because I have an opinion, and it sucks because it's a waste of time and nobody gets it right at the highest level. And then in terms of how much time our organization's actually spending on this flawed process, well, it depends on the complexity of your business naturally, but I did a quick poll on LinkedIn and I found out that 25% of the respondents have spent over 100 hours a week on sales forecasting. So that's that's not just a sales organization. That could be sales, that could be finance, that can be ops, that can be your BI analysts, and like everybody's running around. And like Todd said, we're not operating off of a single source of truth, of data, and there's much better ways to do it. But many organizations are still struggling with that today, as we can see from the comments.
Yeah. So let's, Sam, can I ask you to help us paint a picture, just so we're all talking about the same thing. We know we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
What does, because you work with so many organizations, what does like a quote unquote normal forecasting process look like today?
A normal one. Well, I will say, Mary and Todd are spot on in terms of what sucks about it and how different it is, right? We all hate forecasting because everybody does it differently. People do it differently by teams, by managers, by SDRs, and what they think qualifies as an opportunity. We've had as much as somebody saying, well, if there's a deal in 12 months and it's, a person has a heartbeat, there's an opportunity, just go and sell it. And we're like, that's an interesting bar. But I think the other thing too is there's so much differentiation about when we put in a deal to begin with. So even if we've gone through BANT, even if we know we have the buyer circle committed, even if there's an opportunity there, we know that there's a ton of people who just wait and sandbag so that they don't have to talk about that deal. They don't have to forecast it, right? And then of course we get into the inevitable, this person closed an enterprise deal in 12 days. Why can't you? And you're like, fascinating. He's been working it for 9 months, but he hasn't told any of us. Probably my most dreaded thing as a rep, and then as ultimately a leader. I think that the forecast piece, that it really starts at the top of understanding what does that look like in terms of when do we put in a deal? How do we define each of the stages, right? Making sure that we've got at least qualifiers for what deals should be in what stages, and then that we have a process for how we forecast. So doing forecast call, probably my most dreaded call of the week. I'm sure all of yours as well. But thinking about, do you ask the same questions of all the reps? Do you really understand how to pull apart their deals versus just saying, what's your forecast? And then moving right along. And then do you also pull it apart in terms of why won't this close, right? It's one of my favorite questions to ask when we forecast, because someone's like, oh, well, it won't close for these reasons. And I'm like, great, let's go get around them. But there needs to be some kind of systematic process that everybody agrees to and runs organization-wide.
I just want to comment on it because I think it's very, very true. Being a technology provider, if there's not what I refer to as a sales management system that's being implemented consistently, technology will not solve your problem. You have to have a level of discipline. What do you do weekly, monthly, quarterly, with a level of consistency? Without that, technology will not solve your problem.
Todd, you make such a great point. And let's think about even the lack of investment that we make in our new leaders, right? So we take a top performing AE, we promote them to a frontline manager. The biggest promotion of all. We're trusting people. We're trusting you with our people's livelihoods and their career development. And we give them zero education on how to properly forecast and build their own forecast, right? Which should be a jumble of their collective AE's numbers. So without that, right, how can we expect to have any kind of consistency across the board?
Well, I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to make a prediction. This is the pre-prediction before my 2022 predictions, and I'm going to say 2022 is going to be the year of the sales manager, Sam. And I love that you talked about the sales manager and how difficult it is for that individual. They get promoted mostly because they're a good rep. People like them, and then immediately they start oftentimes making less money, having more pressure. It's very difficult to move from forecasting for oneself to forecasting for 7 people. And historically, we've given them very little support. So I'm so glad that you called that out, because I do think next year you're going to see not only the education and the enablement internally and externally, but as well the sales technology tools that will help that manager be the coach that they want to be, versus someone who's having to go through these excruciating one-to-one meetings to try to understand where the truth sits.
Completely.
Yeah, I just to reinforce that point, I've often said the first line manager's job, sales manager's job, is the most difficult, because you have 3 pressure points that you are right at the vortex of. You have to represent the company from the top. What's the strategy? What are we doing? You're often the first point of escalation from customers when the company's not executing. And then you've got to go sell and support your team. It is this 3-way vice that without the right management system training and support, it's a really, really tough job. Now you get through that and wow, like you've got like the opportunity now to be very, very successful, but it is a really tough job that most organizations don't spend enough time helping people get through that knothole.
Yeah, going back to the sandwich motif. You think about your least favorite sandwich. The sales manager's that protein in between those 2 pieces of bread in your least favorite sandwich, because it's a very uncomfortable position. You're getting pressure from above and pressure from below, and also, like you said, Todd, pressure from the customer in the marketplace.
Yeah. And I think even thinking about how much you need to know about all of the deals, right? Who are we talking to? What stage are we in? What was the last touch point? Especially if your reps aren't great at updating, Salesforce, whatever your CRM of choice is, which I never, ever was. Yeah, there you go. See, I'm like, I'll get to it. I swear. Anyway, here's my forecast. But it's so much to remember, right? And then it can be really frustrating for you as a manager, because sometimes your leader will hop skip around you, just go directly to the AE, and then you show up on forecast call and you're like, oh, crap, I missed something that happened this morning. I think, you guys brought up a good point though, just about that frontline manager, and for anybody that's thinking about making that leap to management at some point or wanting to get there, just 2 things I would call out real quick. One, be that rep. If you want to get promoted, not only be that rep that obviously hits your forecast, hits your quota, all that jazz, but be the one that has all of your details completely buttoned up, that updates next steps, close dates are right? We don't have November 1st as a close date on November 3rd or whatever, October 31st on our next forecast call in November. Make sure you proactively do all of that stuff. The other thing I would say, to the point of making less money, you generally make less money in that first hop and skip to that leadership role, right? This is where you learn your chops, cut your teeth on leadership. And if you were a top performing AE, it can be a real shock to get in there. You're like, wait a minute, my commission is how much compared to what it was before? But think about it for that long game, right? If you want to keep climbing that ladder, that's kind of that necessary step. And one good way to get there is be a great forecaster.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Sam. I mean, it is usually that first 6 months, 9 months, even 12 months. It's for me, when I made that change, that transition, it was many years ago, it was very painful. And I just unfortunately learned the hard way, which many managers do, that don't have the kind of support that you provide to teams. So.
Yeah, totally. I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I got lucky, only because I had a rep that basically made our entire team's number by herself. So I got lucky to not have to take that hit, but it was still a shock, to say the least.
But Colin, if you go back to the original question that started this off, and you put all of this discussion on the first line manager and the process. The reason it sucks so bad is because what you're trying, everybody's got different judgment. Everybody has different risk profiles. What's a committed deal? What's not? When do you put it in the funnel? When don't you? Some people hide stuff. Some people are too aggressive, right? So the whole process is trying to normalize the different assessment, different risk profiles of everybody in your organization, to be able to roll up a forecast that I, as a CRO, can have confidence that I can make. And so this process is all about trying to normalize the deviation of the risk profiles to be able to know what's real and what's not. And it's a very grueling manual process that nobody enjoys. The reps don't enjoy it, the managers don't enjoy it, but you have to, because as a CRO and as you go down into the sales management, like if you don't make your forecast, you typically don't keep your job.
Right.
Let's talk about that, because there are some good questions in the chat right now. Sean asked if you think that reps should be responsible for source of truth input, or if that relies on the manager. I think we talked a little bit about that and how it's subjective either way. But one thing I heard you say, Sam, is that oftentimes it'll be November 11th, and there's something forecasted to close on the 9th. And so what do we call that? Slippage, right? So what are the other inputs to a good forecast beyond the intuition? Like, how do we there's always going to be room for some art and judgment, right? But how do we limit that to the things that we can control? And what are the things that we should be looking at, metrics and other things that we can measure objectively?
I'll say just one thing to think about as a specific AE, like how you can be better about your opportunity management and your forecasting as well. And I realize I'm saying this pot calling kettle black here because I didn't update my next steps, but I think that's a really important part to keeping that data integrity in line. So either looking at the close dates, looking at your next steps, looking at what's in there in terms of your contacts. Are you multi-threaded? Are there multiple people that are part of your buying circle? There absolutely should be, obviously, especially in enterprise deals. But keeping those notes alive and keeping those records actively going, it is an easy way that you, again, can stand out as an AE. And think about it. When we run forecast calls, right, or if we help a client figure out how to run their forecast calls, if we get into Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever, and we see 63 days of no activity, 72 days of no activity, I'm like, what's going on? Either nothing's happening with the opportunity, or you're not doing anything in terms of keeping your records up to date. Especially in this remote world, right, where we don't have as much visibility in the office into our bosses and what we're doing, keeping your records updated and what you're actively working on helps them see everything that you're doing and trust the process is going to move along.
I think the next step is so I agree with everything that Sam just said, but I think we have to get out of the realm of depending upon the rep as the data input on activity, because that's not going to work. I mean, I've tried carrot and stick. You're going to move the needle so much because reps just don't want to spend a lot of time in CRM. There's no ROI for them. They'd rather be out selling. And so what you've got to do now is be able to put in ability to automatically capture that engagement. And the most important engagement is not what I did as what the rep did or what the SA did, but what is the engagement from the customer? If your customers are responding to emails, scheduling meetings, looking at it, if they're engaged with you, they're invested. Your value prop is resonating. How do you get out of the mode of inspecting to validate from the rep, is the value prop resonating? By assessing, is the customer engaging? Because customers will just stop engaging. They'll stop responding to emails. They won't schedule the next meeting. They won't look at your attachment. So how do you get that data without depending upon the rep? That's automatic activity capture. That changes the game from me interrogating and inspecting. Hey, where is this deal? Oh, well, you haven't heard from the customer back from your 3 emails in a month. Like the rep may either not tell me the truth, may not know that deal has really gone quiet, or may be naive enough to think the customer's going to come back, but statistically they're not. Like, that's what I mean by leveraging data to get out of this interrogation game. That's what changes the whole approach going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Todd. And I was chomping at the bit to jump in. Not that I don't disagree with you, Samantha. I think that you have to have your processes in order. You have to. We haven't really talked about this, but I think it's really important. You have to have a sales methodology in place, right? And I don't really care what that methodology is. It just needs to be a vocabulary and a framework from which everyone in the organization can speak to the same things in the same way. Allows you to resource and prioritize and so on and so forth. However, I'm a little bit more in the Todd camp here, where I think we've moved well beyond the days where we're going to have forecast Fridays or Salesforce Fridays, whatever we used to call them. And I'll be honest, I led with a stick as it related to Salesforce integrity with my Salesforce, I actually put in their comp plans that they had to keep everything up to date. And I actually would fire people if they were not compliant because I couldn't do my job. You fire a couple people and then you don't have to have that conversation anymore. Maybe that's too much insight into my former leadership style, but the point is, like, we're so far beyond that now that with engagement intelligence or revenue ops and intelligence capabilities, salespeople shouldn't even be doing data entry and input. We should be extracting that and automating it up to that platform and up to the CRM. And then the signals that we should be looking at are exactly what Todd said, which is, how is the buyer engaging? So like you said, Samantha, is it single threaded or do we have 11 people? Like Gartner says, 11 people are typically involved in an enterprise decision. Are we, continuously touching across a range of different types of channels? Well, between 2019 and 2020, the average number of touch points in an enterprise sale when after SQL increased by 60%. So, you've got to be looking at, did they read the content? Did they share the content? Where did they sit on the proposal? Are we interacting with them across social? Do we have text? And you're saving and extracting all of those interactions and rolling them up to the pipeline and informing the forecast. And I actually see a world, it's kind of like, you don't need a pilot to fly your 747, but it gives us comfort, right, when we get in the plane. Today, I don't even think salespeople should be forecasting. I think we should be extracting all of that information automatically. And then, at the management and higher levels, you start to overlay the art on some of the data. But I don't know, maybe I'm being controversial.
No, I think you guys are both spot on in terms of the data and how everything should feed together, right? It should work together so that we're pulling social touches, we're pulling emails, we can see all of this data, right? It's feeding in from outreach, it's feeding in from LinkedIn, et cetera. I think it's amazing though, like it is an ideal scenario. And yet so many companies that we know and respect don't have some of these basics even down, right? How many enterprise companies we talk to that will say outreach who? And I'm like, oh my God. Right. And we have to do a lot of work to be like, how are you still sending emails one by one in Gmail versus building something so smart like this, right? Or how are you not even employing social touches as a standard part of your cadence? I think you guys are both so right on, right, in terms of what that modern tech stack should look like, how it should feed into each other, and then how that can make us and our reps so much more efficient.
So I think,
sorry, I was going to ask if you can paint us a picture, start to finish. Tell us the story about how forecasting works at InsightSquared, because I get the sense y'all do this in a more enlightened way. You're adopting the tips that you and Mary and Sam are talking about. So what does it look like? How does it start and where do you end up?
Yeah, so where we end up, I think we've talked a lot about where it started. We were no different when I joined. I've been doing forecasting processes, gosh, I feel like the same way for decades. Right? Every forecast starts the same way. You sort the deals high to low, and you start inspecting. You start interrogating. Is this deal real? And it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes if it gets ugly on every deal, and there's always stuff missing from CRM. It's just this always ongoing, this is past due, you didn't update next steps, it's in the wrong stage. That's the process, and we all do some variations of that. Where we go tomorrow is when you automatically capture all of the digital engagement, right? One of the side effects of COVID is that sales process now is so digital. Capture all of that activity, the engagement, without relying on more administrative burden of the rep. We're typically adding about 10 times the amount of activity associated with an opportunity when you do automatic activity capture.
This would be like marketers know when people visit the website. There is intent data.
I'm not even talking about intent. I'm literally just talking about emails, back and forth to customers, meetings scheduled, content shared. Never mind intent. Never mind how many views you've got on content. That takes it even to the next level. Where we're going to go tomorrow is, if you think about an enterprise sale, you have the ability to know, first of all, who is the buying group? Because the other thing we've learned as we've deployed this is most customers have about 30 to 40% of the actual customer contacts in the CRM record, because reps are horrible about adding contacts. SEs don't add anybody. So you don't even actually know who the ideal buying group size is, because the reps are only going to give you the key ones that your sales process is demanding. Who's the decision maker? Who's the influencer? But there might be 6 or 7 others. And so you've got to capture who actually is engaged, who's attending the meeting, who am I engaging with, what does that engagement look like? So if you understand what is the ideal buying group, when do I really start winning? Meeting 6, 7, or is it meeting 10, 12? What's the engagement level look like on a healthy deal? So what's the baseline? You've got to understand that you can't do it when you have 10% of the activity in the CRM record.
So
right?
you're
Reps are
talking
going
about,
to give you, go ahead.
you're talking about creating like metadata about deals. Like for instance, our average deal in this customer segment has its close date moved, 0.3 times.
It's a good example. In some cases, I find some of my customers' numbers of pushes has a direct bearing on win rate. Like I had one the other day that after 3 pushes, the win rate went down to 0. I've had others where push dates, the numbers of pushes have no bearing. Now, what that typically tells me is you don't have discipline in your sales process, because if the win rate is the same after 2 pushes or after 9, you've got a lot of fluff in your forecast. You're probably forcing a high coverage number. So people are avoiding the pain of how much funnel do I have, but it's actually all garbage funnel because it's going to push 7 times, right? So the data now starts to really get you to see how good your process is, but where do you win and why? And then so tomorrow what happens is, if you know where you win and why, you need a system of machine learning that gives those prompts to the rep. And another way to think about this is the system's now doing the interrogation. It's now the BS meter, right? You have this in forecast, but BS, you've only had 3 meetings. You haven't heard from the customer in a month, and you only have 2 contacts. We win when you have 8, right? And so it now forces the rep to be honest with the data and say, yeah, you're right. I can't really hide this deal in the funnel. I got to put it where it needs to be, because I know my manager now has that information too. And so I, as a manager, when I come into a forecast, the noise out of the funnel is gone. I don't need to waste the time spending 5 minutes inspecting a high confidence deal, because I can see it. The system is validating it. The rep sees it. 15 seconds, done. Move on. I just bought myself 4.5 minutes to go focus on the deals that maybe the rep needs some help. My coaching, it's at a critical inflection point. Maybe they've gone quiet for a couple of weeks, and I got to help the rep get this deal back on track. Now you're coaching that rep, right? But what the system is doing is it's doing that interrogation, but it's making the rep think, it's benchmarking, and it's making them think and be more accountable for their data. So you're taking the judgment out of it now, right? So now what happens is you go into a forecast review and the rep is saying, hey, I disagree with what the system says. Here's why. If they can't disagree with what the system says, they move it out. And I don't need to waste any time as a manager. That's what fundamentally changes. Now you're back to coaching.
We've had a couple questions in the chat. Earlier on, Levin Schmid asked, what frequency should we be forecasting it for products with a long deal cycle? And then Frank Nardi asked the opposite question. How does that change for high volume transactional sales, 30-day sales cycle?
It's a great question. I mean, it really is a question back to the process that we talked about. So I believe, in my experience, in a long sales cycle, 65, 90 days, if you have to do a one-on-one forecast funnel review with a rep more than once a month, your process is not very good, because it's not going to change that much. Now, you do weekly checkpoints, but they're quick, right? Because now you're using the system. In a transactional business, less than 60 days, you're probably doing them much more frequently weekly, right? So the frequency depends upon the length of the sales cycle. But I often see, goes back to some of the initial discussion, new managers will often have way too many forecast reviews, like way too many. I'm like, it doesn't change that much. You're just wasting time. If you do a good quality job once a month on a long sales cycle, and you're doing weekly checkpoints as a team, like, get out of the way. Let the reps sell.
I think that's where there's a struggle for leaders as well, though, is they don't know what good looks like. So they think, if I say I'm having a forecast call, if I say I'm having one-on-ones, if I say I'm doing these things, right, then it's fine and it'll buy me however long I need. It's same thing for reps who are like, well, I made 100 calls today. And you're like, sounds good to me. And then you move on. Well, wait a minute, right? There's so much more to it than that. I think that the deal inspection and the coaching, right, of like understanding why haven't these deals moved forward? Why haven't we gotten a response from the client in 3 weeks? What is it that you haven't quite thought to do is super important. I find, in our coaching, and I think every rep that I've really worked with, it's rare to find the reps that really, again, in my experience, that really understand how to drive a deal forward, right? What are the next natural steps? How to not put on happy ears, how to not just throw anything in the pipeline after a discovery call. And I think that that's one of the most critical things, right? Mary, like you were saying, next year is the year of the sales manager. It is really coaching, not on negotiation 401, but on the basic fundamentals of selling and driving deals forward step by step, and having not only a sales methodology, right? Like if we're spin or band or challenger, whatever the hell, Sam sales, no, not too soon. Whatever you are, right? Also, like those are high level only. Like then how do you have a conversation? How do you multi-thread? How do you say the words that help move the deal, right? In a client-centric way versus just a salesy way. Like that is so important for us to focus on as well.
Yep. Agree.
Todd, let's let me change topics real quick for a second, because we've talked a lot about the rep and the manager, but obviously there's more people involved in forecasting and affected by forecasting than just the sales team. Mary, you pulled out a stat. I want to say you found from sales leaders that it's just something like 100 hours a week in medium to large size organizations across many people spent on forecasting. And I'm kind of curious, Todd, what this looks like then when you have conversations with your executive team or even with your board. How does this change the dynamic if you have a system and a process where your forecast is like 3 notches more objective and more reliable? How does that feel for you as a CEO? What's different?
Oh my God, it's a game changer, right? Because before every board meeting, or frankly, typically the way that I've set up this process is I would always commit to the CEO, CFO as a CRO that I will give you a forecast on what we're going to do this quarter by the beginning of week 2. And there's a lot of work that goes into week 1. And then you got to update it week 1 of month 2, week 1 of month 3. There's so much analysis that's being done by your sales ops, rev ops team. Your finance is typically a partner. There's so many dependencies on in some businesses that have a lot of in-quarter demand that needs to get converted. So there's statistical components of a forecast, or if you're just a long sales cycle and everything is coming out of the funnel, that's a different set of analytics. And so oftentimes you've got some businesses that are former and some are the latter. So there's a lot of analytics that says, okay, here's what's bubbling up. Now, what do we think? And at the end of the day, I have to stand up as the CRO in front of the CEO, CFO first, and then the board. And what they're inevitably doing is kind of looking me in the eye and assessing, do I agree with his judgment? And there's always judgment in the forecast, always. In the new system, I've now got much greater statistical, quantitative analytics that says this funnel, based upon this engagement, is going to deliver X. And I know what my reverse funnel is based upon how many leads, based upon conversion rates I need to have to be able to meet my in quarter. And I can sit down with my marketing team and say, hey, are you signing up for these metrics that flow through to my in period? It becomes a much more data-centric alignment discussion that is much more comforting for all of the C-suite as well as the board, and certainly for me as a CRO.
I'm sure. Mary, what do you've been in touch? I mean, I know you and Todd know each other from your Forrester days. I know you know also a lot of other CROs. How do you see this like next level forecasting affecting the CRO role?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm just in the heat of the moment of analyzing some research that I conducted with Forrester Consulting Organization that looks at what CROs are thinking about, what they're worrying about, where they're investing, how they think about their own skill set, how they think about their managers and rep skill set, and by and large, how they're adapting to an environment that is highly volatile and full of lots and lots of change. One of the things I think that we're not talking about right now is we are in a world where, I just read the other day, like People now are embracing plant-based diets because of inflation costs on meat. So every other day, there's like a new wrinkle, right, in our worlds. And that's really going to affect businesses, and businesses are going to need greater visibility and hold their CROs to a higher standard of performance. In my research, I looked at, I asked these CROs, what are the top attributes that you see as necessary for your role? And they said strong financial skills, the ability to deliver predictable, efficient growth. It's not just growth, but it's having real predictability around it. And the third one is strong forecasting skills. And so I think for CROs who can be analytical, understand how to ingest and make decisions around data, and have the financial acumen to communicate to their executive team colleagues and board, are going to find themselves having a better seat at the table. Because the reality is, and I know Todd knows this, and I'm sure Sam does as well, like the real conversation in the board meeting happens when the CRO leaves. And it's not always complimentary. So having a system, both from a process and sales methodology standpoint, but equally, if not more important, having the ability to extract those human behavioral activities from the buy side to inform that forecast, are going to put the CRO in a much better position as their role gets increasingly more difficult as a result of changing buyers, as well as the global, social, political, and all the other dynamics that we're dealing with on a daily basis. I mean, this is a world that, like, we've never seen this before. I mean, maybe like if my dad could come back and tell us it was like this in World War II or whatever, but you know, he's not, and I've never seen anything like this. And I think the pressure is going to be on heads of sales pretty intensely. I'd love to know what Sam and Todd think on that.
I think, you know, Mary, I think you nailed it. And you think about those priorities for those CROs, you think about the last two, about how do we build something predictable, and then how do we have better forecasting skills? It goes right back to what Todd said about the fact that we can't allow this to rely on gut instinct, right? On all of the varieties of gut instinct. It has to be on data specifically. I agree with you. You know, we're in such a different climate, and it feels like something's changing every single day. But I think also goes back to the importance of us really thinking about foundational skill sets, that human side of the buying sales cycle as well. Can think about, again, we're, I think, in a world where we jumped a few years ago to scale everything, right? We could do everything overnight, we could send 100,000 emails, we could do this, we could do that in one push of a button. And I think our buyers, you know, especially in COVID, but certainly over the last years, have become so much more discerning. They want that human connection. They want you to give, you know, a damn about them, frankly. They want you to do that show me, you know me, to do that homework, to come forward with a point of view, to have some consultative opinions. They want that from you, right? And not every deal is the same. We've got our transactional, our high velocity deals, but we're thinking about even our you know, upper scale SMB, mid-market, and certainly enterprise deals. We have to make those investments as a CRO, as a head of sales, in the development of those reps, because otherwise they're just going to be doing the things that they've been doing for the last decade or so, which don't match what our buyers expect now.
Yeah, let me, an additional comment, Colin, on this, because I feel like I've been in this pressure cooker for a good part of my career as a CRO. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in C-suite meetings where marketing has its set of metrics on what it's going to do. Product says, this is how competitive we are, you should never be losing. Finance has its spreadsheet. And at the end of the day, if you don't make the number, the target is on the CRO. So there's more dependencies to execute. And oftentimes I've been in those meetings where I have not had the data to align everybody cross-functionally. I'll share a story. I worked for a large company, and we had a very significant in-period demand with very specific targets. And my CMO at the time changed the definition of tier 1 leads because the vanity metrics weren't coming in. And so we started to have a big tail off of conversions, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And frankly, it took me till the end of month 1 in the following quarter on why we missed. This is where CEOs are really struggle, right? They sit in these MBRs, management, these monthly business reviews, quarterly business reviews. Every function's kind of reporting. There's not been one unified set of data that says, well, let me actually tell you, Mr. Product Manager, that when this competitor is engaged or comes up at this point in the sales process, your win rate drops by 50%. Or the lead conversions is dropping Like you need to know that through the weeks to be able to have an alert system that says something's changed. I'm not Superman. I can't make up for a product slipping, a product quality issue, lead quality coming down, right? The sales execution is a company execution, but oftentimes the CEO, CFO are sitting there trying to figure out marketing says this, product says this, CRO says this, but ultimately when you don't execute from a board standpoint, it's got to be sales, shoot the sales guy.
Can we talk, let's unpack that one thing that you said there. Let's say we can have access to this kind of data and we uncover that every single time this competitor comes up, as soon as they're mentioned, we know our win rate drops 50%. Imagine, right, putting a model together like this where you are actually tracking this, you have access to this data, and when that competitor is mentioned, it's like all red lights go off in the office, right? Like all hands on deck, we have to figure out how to solve for this. This is where the lack of data is really failing us, right? Because you're spot on, Todd. Like these are the kinds of data points we need to be able to make better decisions, right? And to historically look at what's happened to make sure they don't happen again in the future.
That's exactly right. And so as a CRO, if we know that, now I can challenge my product and my marketing team. Hey, you're not as strong against this competitor. Or, hey, marketing, when this happens, what's the material that's going to enable us to not lose that? Or field enablement, let's make sure we're setting all the traps, because when this competitor comes in at this stage, like if you know that, now you can align execution to be able to anticipate and improve results. And so when you have the automatic activity capture that's collecting all of the content and the recordings, and knowing when that competitor gets engaged and how it's being brought up and by who in the buying group, like the power is so different. And just contrast that to where we are historically. The rep may not even bring up the fact that a competitor is engaged in that deal, right? So that may come up in interrogation, it may not. If the rep doesn't know that the win rate drops, the whole organization is not attuned to the fact that when competitor X gets engaged at this stage of the sales process, if you have everybody attuned to it, boom, now you can have everybody aligned to execute. That's how data changes this game.
Let's talk about, so I've heard words like fire, shoot the CRO, using the stick, right? And so there's this, and I have to say, when I first entered that account management role in an agency long ago, I knew that I would have to do some selling. What I didn't know is that I would have to tell everybody how much selling I was going to do and prove about how I was going to do it ahead of time. And that to me was so much scarier than the act of selling. And as soon as that fear entered my brain, I started operating, became an irrational human being, right? I wasn't prepared for it. And my lizard brain switched on, and I was making bad judgment calls, and I was stuttering in my client meetings, and like it was a mess, and I missed my number. It sounds like when I hear terms like pressure cooker from somebody who's been a CRO many times, that fear doesn't necessarily go away. You learn how to cope with it.
The way you address fear is by understanding the exposure as early in the quarter as possible. Mm-hmm. If your judgment at the end of that week one is we have a concern, my funnel is not as strong, or I'm going to need a lot more, or I'm seeing signs of end of last quarter where competitive execution is starting to tail off. So what you're trying to do is get comfort on your judgment. And if I have more data to bring more people together or to raise the awareness that we are exposed this quarter, right? The way a CRO or a sales manager survives missing their number is by alerting the system early to give the company time to either correct or the CEO to set proper expectations with the board. That's how you get the fear out of the system, by dealing with the reality, the facts, and getting everybody cross-functionally to help, not my sales team, our sales team execute. That's the fundamental difference.
I think you want to think about too for early stage organizations, right? We walk into a lot of companies that got their Series A or they're working with Series B. They're just really working now, getting their true sales experts in place and building their sales teams. But a lot of these organizations make their forecasts before they ever have any credibility to do so, right? Or without an expert to help them do that. So something to think about too is if you do need to reset expectations on what that forecast is, and let's say you're middle of the quarter and you've got to do it not only for this quarter, but it's probably going to affect next quarter. Do it once, right? Take that gut punch one time, set realistic expectations, and then make a plan to get to that number. I think the pressure cooker piece, I would say too, it's not isolated obviously to the CRO or the CEO. It bleeds down to the entire organization. And I think it does start with realistic expectations, making sure that we built a mathematical model of why we're asking for this quota from reps, and then why what we're giving the number as a forecast. But I think the other thing is think about that from a leadership perspective. Have you set realistic expectations either for your managers or for your reps? And are you treating them, the right way? Because for us, I'll tell you a story from another organization I worked for. We were always the team that performed every single quarter. We overperformed. We always beat everybody. And that became our personal hell of a pressure cooker, because nobody else ever set expectations correctly, could do a proper forecast, and then we were left to hold the stick to be able to come up with our number. So just think about that too, right? Are you letting your top performers go and run, and then pressuring the other people who aren't actually getting their number, or is it the reverse and you're just asking them to save the day every time?
Yep. I think there's a bunch of questions in the chat that I know, Colin, you were answering relative to rep accountability. I've got a strong opinion on this. That as you get to be a larger organization, so no matter where you are, if you're small, medium, or you're large, if you're small and medium, the only way you're going to scale, in my experience, is to have rep accountability to forecast. It's the only way you get a proper input relative to the risk assessment. If reps aren't accountable and you're putting it all on the first line manager, you're adding to that pressure cooker, and that manager's probably going to need to spend way more time interrogating and inspecting to be able to be forecast, because you're not driving the accountability to the rep. Now, I also, though, would always say that it's hard to put forecast accuracy as a measurement on a rep, because depending upon the rep, it could be one or two deals that move. As you have a portfolio of business, that's where forecast accuracy really comes into play. But the thing I learned early on was that if I could get my reps to be accountable for my forecast as a first line manager, we were in this together. So that if you as a rep fall, the other 8 reps are going to have to make that up. We're in this together. We are accountable. And if you can do that, then your ability as a first line manager and the information flow up is so much better. And you get to be a larger scale, organization. If you don't have rep accountability, I would tell you, it's going to be impossible.
Yeah, it seems to me like if you can fix your forecasting process such that you start to index more on things like, deal size, the presence of competitors, slippage, engagement on emails and calls and content, things like that. When you do that, it's easier to enforce rep accountability, because you're not asking them to do a bunch of manual work. You're asking them to use the data you both have at your disposal.
You're providing the insights, right? You're providing the insights for them to manage their turn. They get something out of this, right? Like your best reps want the insights from benchmarking of what great deals look like, because they're self-learners, right? They want to figure it out. Your early reps, they don't want to hide. They're hiding because they're faking it till they make it, right? So expose all that. Force the dialogue and the coaching for your best reps to manage their territories better. For me as a manager to be able to know where I can go help and coach them, and then really focusing on where you can move the needle based upon those deals that are close but need some help.
And this is where I was hoping we'd end up today. We have a few minutes left, folks. So if you have a question or you want to troubleshoot your process with Mary, Todd, and Sam, drop it in there. But my last question for y'all is, maybe it's more of a prompt, is like, it seems to me that when the forecasting process is reliable and offers predictability, real predictability, the waterfall of effects there could be that there's a lot of positive changes that happen to the general culture of sales, all the interactions between managers and reps and managers and leadership. Can you talk a little bit about how you'd see that? Like, does the role of the salesperson become less sweaty and less hustle culture? And, how much of a change is it, and where does the change stop?
I'll let somebody else start first, because I feel like I've been talking too much.
I think it does become less sweaty for the capable reps, right? So I think all of that information pulls out whether the reps that you have are the right ones, they're doing the right activities, having the right conversations, driving the deals, right? And I think it helps you figure out what your team looks like and who should stay or who should go.
Mm.
I can't really answer because I'm obsessed with Mike. I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
I know that's a really
Montesano.
conversation.
Yeah. So I wasn't really listening. I'm just going back and forth with Mike because I think it's he's actually really brought up an interesting point. He thinks that RevOps is more focused on finance and data and less focused on the human contribution. And so I have a different perception. I shared my podcast platform for revenue innovators. So I encourage you to take a look at that or take a listen, Mike. And I think, but I think Mike sort of dialed into a pretty important topic here, which is, how far do you lean into the science and the math versus the art and the humanity and the empathy? And I do think that, and the wisdom that unique individuals, whether they're a rep, manager, or C-suite exec, bring to the process. And so I just want to be clear with my position, which is I want to use the best tools and platforms that are out there. I want to take a data-driven approach to kind of running my business if I was in a practitioner role. And then you absolutely have to overlay sort of the human empathy and the human experience on top of those decisions. Like Todd was talking a lot about the insights that the AI and machine learning can surface. You don't have to like blindly follow the buffalo off the cliff. Right. You can be like, I've got these 4 recommendations for the system, but I've been through this situation before as a CRO, and we're going to go in this direction. And so that's the part I just want to make sure people don't forget, that the humanity and the human decision-making doesn't get disintermediated. It's augmented by the data and technology and insights. But at the end of the day, your experience and wisdom and humanity should influence the decision. So that's my soapbox.
I couldn't agree with you more. This does not replace the judgment and the empathy and the art of sales. At the end of the day, selling is all about relationships and developing confidence with customers. Well, what this does do, though, is force the discussions that are most productive for the rep and for the business. Right? It removes the noise from the system, the interrogation and the inspection process. And when you have those reps that are really good, that have that really good art of sales, and you give them the analytical insights to be able to leverage that better, right? To call BS that this deal is dead. And now they may have an insight that the system's wrong. That's great. That's great. That's a very productive discussion. If they don't, then I've gotten them to think, I've gotten them to use their qualitative judgment, their experience, and no harm, no foul, and no wasted time.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's great. It's great to see all the activity in the chat. And I thank Mike and everyone for pushing us, because, that's what these discourses are intended to do. There's not necessarily one right and wrong answer, but just to have a great conversation and bring out some thought-provoking and new ways of going to market.
That's right.
Right on. This was a really exciting conversation. I think we'll give people a few minutes back at their hour, but I have one quick thing, which is for the 36 people left. If you go on LinkedIn and you tag Sam, Todd, and Mary, and you share the best nugget of wisdom today, maybe a quote, maybe a joke about a sandwich, or anything you learned, tag those 3 in Sales Hacker, and I'll send you something nice.
Oh.
We don't always do that.
Ooh, can we tag ourselves?
Oh, nice. I know.
Yeah. Well, you 3 get something nice by default.
All right.
Because we really are grateful for your time. Grateful for everybody that stopped by too. This was a really cool conversation. Loved seeing how active the chat was. Sales Hacker community never really lets me down, but man, I'm grateful for it. So Sam, Mary, and Todd, thank you all so much. This was really great, and I want to have you all back sometime soon.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. Have a great day.